Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Atlantis is indeed the missing link of Pangaea, located in mid-Atlantic. We will share with you its story in detail below. But be aware, not all of the great temple crystals of Atlantis were lost. Indeed, some of you were involved in their rescue. Dear ones, these crystals were saved from destruction, and now you are offered the memory of why. For such magnificent crystal beings offer all of you so much. The expansion, the sacred completion applies to all. It is time to remember who you were, in order to become all you are in this awakening time, this return to the quantum crystalline field. Atlantis was a golden time, a magnificent epic that was betrayed by its unseemly end. And so we now tell you the true history of that demise. You see, Atlantis existed for over 200,000 years. The vast majority of the Atlantean times were epochs of light. Only the final phase, the period from 17,500 BC to 10,500 BC, was in your terms, a dark era, but one rich in lessons. The Golden Age of Atlantis. We tell you, in fact, that the golden period of Atlantis was the highest level of light consciousness ever achieved on the Earth plane in any advanced civilization. Higher than Lemuria, higher than Mu, higher than Rama, higher than Ignatius. It has become somewhat fashionable to consider Lemuria as being the utopian civilization, and though they did achieve a relatively short-lived phase of high consciousness, most in that era were not truly in physical bodies, rather in Devic-like etheric states, and did not face the difficulties required of the physical Earth stage. Indeed, Lemuria never achieved the highly advanced level that existed in that golden phase of Atlantis from 40,000 BC to 18,000 BC. A time when gods walked with men and all knew joyful expression. It was the hallowed time when many of you walked as star children, and later chose biology and the lesson cycles of reincarnation on the blue planet called Earth. So when you consider Atlantis, do not only remember its sad demise. It was but a short phase of the magnificent antediluvian world, yet it must not be forgotten. So very much is to be gained by understanding the final phase. And dear ones, it is time to remember the Atlantean hologram. So we speak of once mighty Atlantis, and we speak to all of you, for Atlantis is a great holographic lesson, and ones whose time has returned. For the memory of Atlantis is not just a healing. Indeed, for some it is a requisite healing, a necessary cleansing, but for others it is also a benevolent empowerment. It recalls a time when you walked in wisdom and harmony. Regardless of your myriad roles in Atlantis, and dear ones, 70% of all on planet Earth at this time experienced physicality there. Atlantis now calls to you. And the call is not just for those of you of the Law of One. It is equally called to the sons of Belial. Indeed, many of you experienced lifetimes in both ideologies. Does that surprise you? The deluge of 17,500 BC, downward spiral of the final phase. The time is after the second deluge, when the utopian golden age subsided and Atlantis split into 5 islands. The 3 major islands were known as Poseida, the Isle, and Og. The 2 smaller islands were under the rule of the Italia and Air. And so in the days after the second breakup of Atlantis, the benevolent government rule by a kingdom passed into the phase of a confederation, state governments in your present terms, that ruled each of the islands. An aristocracy of sorts evolved that consisted of 2 opposing ideologies. The 2 major components of these were the Atla-Ra scientist priesthood of the Law of One, based predominantly on the island of Poseida, and the Sons of Belial based on the Isle. The island was the most populated and exerted influence and political control over Og, Italia, and Air. The island of Poseida was the planet's most potent vortex portal complex at the time of Atlantis. The Poseida grouping housed the Temple of Healing, the Temple of Sound, the Temple of One, the Temple of Regeneration, and the Temple of Knowledge. Poseida housed most of the major centers for higher learning. These were placed on Poseida because of its advantageous location within the geodesic grids and its proximity to beneficial electromagnetic energies that spiraled upward from the Earth's core. An incredibly potent healing spring flowed on Poseida, near the Temple of Healing, and its lore spawned the myths of the Fountain of Youth passed down by the indigenous peoples of Florida. It flows yet into the oceans near Bimini. The tall ones, the golden race of Atlantis of Pleiadian seed, were centered in Poseida, these ones averaging 10 to 12 feet in stature. These were a gentle race of giants involved in the cultural, artistic, and educational pursuits in the heart of Atlantis. Poseida was also the headquarters and nucleus of the crystalline power grid and interdimensional tunnel system. The most advanced, complex, and beautiful of the crystals were here. They were of Arcturian and Syrian Pleiadian construct, a living amalgam of many crystalline forms imbued with an alloy of platinum and gold. The crystals were housed in magnificent temples, some built of marble, others of crystalline sheets of beryl, corundum, and diamond. The city of Poseida was the capital city of the island and was called the Emerald City. Its bioplasmic field was projected into a shimmering, glowing aurora of emerald green, visible for miles. The Atlanteans had perfected, with Arcturian technology, the ability to grow crystals of every structure and essence in an accelerated growth within the underground crystal beds of Arkansas, Tibet, and Brazil, all being Atlantean colonies, accessed through the interdimensional tunnel system. The poser fields and the crystal satellite. Throughout Atlantis, power grid crystals called posers were triangulated and connected through an alloyed gold-copper rod under a spherical dome that could be angled to receive specific stellar, solar, and gravitational energy waves. This was the system used to power homes, offices, media, and theaters, manufacturing concerns, medical centers, schools, and businesses. The poser system was received in each structure by receiving crystal units of various sizes. The poser system was also able to receive specialized refracted light and feed it into the ley energy system for use in the interdimensional tunnel system, and feed crystalline light into conductive earth currents to raise the frequency into a semi-aware electromagnetic plasmic field of benevolent energy capable of retaining spiritual frequencies. A great crystalline satellite, referred to as the second moon of Atlantis, floated above in the skies and received, amplified, and reflected refined energy back to the crystals for various beneficial purposes. It served both the posers and the master crystals used in the temples. Specialized energy fields were projected into agricultural and crystal growing areas to amplify and accelerate growth, as well as into universities, hospitals, schools, offices, factories, and workplaces to create a sense of well-being and invigoration for the workers and students. We will speak more of this second moon later in this essay. Now, the temples were astonishing works of sacred geometry and stunning architecture. Many of the great temples were covered in a dome of projected crystalline amplified light somewhat like a glowing force field. Others were set within pyramids degreed at very specific angles. The energy fields projected above both the spherical domes and the pyramids were of various colors and glowed in day and night like the aurora. These were varied according to the purpose of the temple complex, and the colors were obviously more clearly visible at night. Some temples projected domes and fields of vibratory light and resonant sound frequencies that amplified the senses and chakras. Others amplified the receptive learning ability of the mind, and others enabled multidimensional consciousness, communication, and transport. The pyramidal form was used primarily for multidimensional receival and transmission. The dome spheres were used to amplify the fields received for specific purposes. Most of the major populous areas and cities during the Golden Age of Atlantis had crystalline power domes of energy plasmic fields above them. When observed from a distance, these energy plasma fields would appear as if they were a tangible glass, but they were not solid, rather subatomic plasma, and composed of what is termed bioplasma. These were regulated by the amazing magnanimous glowing platinum crystal of bioplasmic interface. The crystal itself was transparent, but the field it projected was a luminescent platinum in hue. Poseida. Each of the master crystals, and there were 12, were networked with a series of satellites. After the second deluge, only the capital city of Poseida had a full crystalline energy dome, and it was an incredible emerald green color. Prior to the deluge of 17,500 BC, most major cities, including Maruvia, the capital of the island, had such power domes over the perimeter. The one in the capital was a soft ruby red. In the Golden Age of Atlantis, the pyramids were 3- and 4-sided, depending on their utility, and generally made of marble, granite, and complex crystals. The 3-sided pyramids were used as antennas to draw and amplify energies, and fed them into the poser grid to power homes, factories, and create energy fields for various utilities. The crystalline satellite was used to reflect the angled stellar energy waves into these triangulated grids. There were over 100 of these triangulated pyramidal grid complexes. They were set up in concentric triangulation patterns all over the planet. They established a hemispheric grid network of crystalline and electromagnetic energy, dividing the areas of Atlantis, America, Africa, Mediterranean Europe, and South America into different demographic centers for powering population centers and to modulate weather patterns and tides. The areas of Mongolia and Tibet were also part of this complex, connected by interdimensional ley tunnels. But the largest groupings of these were in the homelands of Atlantis. The 4-sided pyramids were essentially temple complexes, set as full octahedrons and used for healing, learning, regeneration, and spiritual purposes. These were not triangulated, and generally sat on hilltops or along the coastlines to receive both telluric and celestial energies. The lands below the center plane were excavated to allow for the downward part of the pyramid of the octahedron design construct, thus connecting energetically to both above and below. The law of one contingency of Poseida were devoutly spiritual people and sought equality among the people and a unification of oneness. Their society was feminine matriarchal in the sense of nurturing. They were not seekers of power, rather of harmony. They were a tall race. Their skin appeared toned as a golden hue, but was very translucent. It was in fact their auric projection that glowed golden. Their auric fields were visible to all. Thus the stages of spiritual mastery were immediately discernible by the colors and size of the auric merkana. The highest among the Atla-Ra exuded Merkara, the energy of the avatar. They were able to operate in complete consciousness of multidimensionality, to manifest and regenerate at will. As such, they cannot be truly compared to present humans. Their bodies were luminous and the degree of physical manifestation was far less dense than humans in the present age. In Merkana and Merkara format, the masters of the Atla-Ra did not truly consider themselves of the earth. The Merkara field of the avatar, even in physical manifestation in 3D, was primarily on Earth via the 12th dimension. They required very little food consumption as their bodies were bioplasmic in nature, thus the longevity, for they were beyond linear space and duality time. In their wisdom and nature, they were quite detached from the 3D density aspect of the Earth. They existed beyond the duality polarity, yet were in a form of light physicality. That detachment above duality polarity is in part the reason they did not karmically oppose the decline into physical density, as the sons of Belial became engrossed in what may be termed military corporate power lust. Although much technology and quality of life had been lost in the prior 2 breakups of Atlantis, the first in 58,000 BC, the second being in 17,500 BC, technology still remained at an advanced level. Yet the harmony experienced in the Golden Age of Atlantis spiraled downward after the breakup into islands in 17,500 BC, as the islands grew into separately governed entities, which held to very differing ideologies in the initially chaotic and difficult period of reconstruction immediately after the breakup. Poseidon remained within the contingency of the spiritual law of one, while the people became gradually engrossed in power and materialism. Poseida and the Atla-Ra, a highly disciplined and evolved sect of scientist priests, held the technical wisdom and expertise of managing the crystal power grids. The vast majority of Atla-Ra were of the tall golden race, but there were also members from the bronze, white, Lemurian brown, and cetacean races. At that time, there were still avatar-level cetacean dolphin beings that walked on 2 legs. These highly benevolent dolphins verbally communicated and breathed air in a similar fashion to humankind. The avatar cetacean were golden in auric projection, and are the source of those termed the golden dolphin. The golden dolphin were harbingers of the aspect termed matriarchal, an energy that you term feminine divine, although they were primarily non-gendered in the physical sexual sense of the present paradigm. The sect of scientist priests were referred to as the Atla-Ra. The Atla-Ra maintained the highest standards of consciousness and were able to continue vibrating at very high frequencies of consciousness, at and above the level of 12th dimensional light and energy, remaining very pure and resonant with the true oneness concept of the Creator God. They sustained higher dimensional telepathic contact with the advanced space brethren from the Pleiades, Arcturus, Andromeda, and Sirius. The Atla-Ra priests were highly disciplined, revered, and traditionally separate, above and exempt from governmental controls, and thus kept the knowledge and senior management of crystal technology largely in the wise and benevolent hands of the priest sect, although there were some technicians and crystal engineers from the Poseidon populace involved who were not in the Atla-Ra priest sect. The scientist priests of Atla-Ra were both male and female and were capable of great lifespans, both through the regeneration of mind power and through the technology of the same in the Temple of Rejuvenation. Many lived lifetimes in the same biology for 6,000 years, some to 12,000 years. Thus was the technology preserved through this holy sect. Many brilliant souls were among these. The entities you know as Galileo, Isaac Newton, Einstein, Tesla, Edison, Marcel Vogel, and Da Vinci were among the Atla-Ra. Tiburon and Oneron were part of this group of scientist priests who lived very long lifetimes. Many of you, especially your artists, have great recall of the capital city of Atlantis of Poseida, located on the island of Poseida. It was termed the Emerald City because of the glowing green light dome projected over it. Some of your artists, in fact, have made renditions of the city that are quite accurate. It was an exquisite marvel of architecture, culture, and engineering, by far the most beautiful metropolis that has ever existed on your planet. It was breathtaking. The city, named Poseida, as was the surrounding state, was composed of a series of concentric walls and encircled by flowing sea-green canals. It was full of beautifully constructed temples, universities, theaters, and museums. At the very center was a hill, and on top of the hill the majestic and stunning Temple of Poseidon, which was visible from everywhere in the holy Emerald City. Inside the temple was a massive gold statue of the god of the sea, Poseidon, showing him driving 6 winged horses made of extraterrestrial platinum. The statue was embellished with precious gemstones of every color and type. The temple was octagonal, and along each of the 8 walls were built convex enclosures, with platforms for amazing crystals that stood 12 feet high and glowed like transparent diamonds. Poseida had been the least damaged of the major Atlantean cities after the breakup of the original single continent into islands in 17,500 BC, and was still of a very high frequency and quality of life. The Isle and the Industrial Complex. The Isle was the largest of the Atlantean islands and the most populated. It was the commercial center and yielded the most influence from the economic, agricultural, and military perspective. After the second deluge, it was significantly damaged, and the infrastructure required a chaotic stage of rebuilding. In the process, the state became controlled by an elitist who gained control of the economy, military powers, and island state government, even though the majority of the populace were themselves of the Bronze or Red. From there grew a corrupt, power-minded aristocracy who sought to block the law of one and utilize Atlantis' technology for control of the world. This through the utilization of crystalline energy for weaponry and use of genetic science for development and retention of an inferior species to serve as workers and soldiers. The genetic engineering was based in Maruvia on the Isle. It had originally been used for benevolent purposes, for seeking improved physical vehicles for those that had incarnated into physical bodies that mutated into half-man, half-beast abominations. The genetic work had been processed and developed and was used to remove appendages, claws, feathers, and reptilian skins and scales. This was done in the Temple of Purification, somewhat of a specialized medical center. Again, we emphasize that during the previous golden age of Atlantis, its utility had been quite benevolent. Tremendous genetic advances were made, and a great understanding of cloning and adjusting physical limitations for betterment came in responsible, ethical utility. In the chaos of the Reconstruction period, genetic engineering came under the control of the Belial group and then degenerated into corrupt uses of greed and power. The genetic engineering began being used for dark ends in creating a species of worker slaves and hybrid man-animals. In fact, many of the genetic scientists were initially kept unaware of what their research and development work was being used for, until it was essentially too late for them to stop it. Some of you carry great guilt to this day as a result of this work. The Law of One and the Sons of Belial. This use of genetically engineered servant classes led to the great rift between the Atla-Ra priesthood-led race of Poseida, following the Law of One, and the Sons of Belial, the latter of which became so engrossed and hardened in the materialistic ambitions of the industrial machine that they lost sight of the spiritual ethics that had prevailed over the continent of Atlantis in the previous Golden Era. Literally hundreds of thousands of hybrid mutations were created to work the fields, and monstrosities were created with controlled minds to robotically do the bidding of their masters. The agro-industrial society became quite dependent on them. Souls became trapped in cloned bodies termed things and others, with genetic lobotomies and nullified sexuality and emotional abilities. Many who were trapped in monstrous or sub-intelligent androgynous human bodies still carry that horrendous pain of being imprisoned in physical embodiments that allowed for no advanced learning, spiritual growth, or emotional expression. We tell you that the beings you refer to as Sasquatch are remnants of human gorilla genetic engineered mutants created for heavy labor. Genetic engineering for commercial purposes was highly opposed by the spiritual Atla-Ra and Poseidons of the Law of One. The Law of One founded a form of cruel slavery and morally abhorrent. The Law of One remained a nurturing matriarchal spiritual culture, while they grew into a powerful military corporate society, dominated by the upper class. For several millennia, the two ideologies remained headlocked over this issue, and governmental agencies were in a state of delicate impasse. The Poseidons were far too cultured and gentle in nature to attempt to fight the Sons, and sought to educate them and spiritually influence them into changing their ways. The Sons, who outnumbered the Poseidons 3-1, dared not attack Poseida, lest they had the crystalline energy that powered the nation shut off.
I have seen some of these humanoid plus forms with reptilian features. I thought they were remnants of the Lemurian mer beings that had interbred with man and become more humanoid but still with reptilian features. I think many of those beings were from alien planets, especially Lyra, which had been involved in war and had beings with bird-like features, reptilians, and humans. I think they came to Earth as part of a refugee resettlement program, but their souls still had the etheric DNA of their previous planetary environments. Since we were more etheric, our souls influenced more of our manifestation into physicality. I've also had some issues with manifestation of a body in certain dreams, usually related to hands, and sometimes with feet. Sometimes I had less fingers, sometimes more, like 12 fingers, 11 toes kind of thing. It's really disconcerting. Various beings have tried to help me manifest correctly, but it doesn't always work. I wish I could go to some temples like that. I think I'm a bit confused, because as I try to manifest more of my interdimensional self, I have trouble choosing which set of genetics to utilize to manifest it.
Colonial wars. In the interim, outbreaks of war erupted between the Sons controlled the Atlantean military, as the former colonies of Atlantis located in the Mediterranean areas broke traditional ties and developed their own independent governments. The colonies, particularly those in Greece and Turkey, saw the change from the utopian Atlantis to the military fascist state controlled by the Sons and sought to break away. Although the Sons had the military edge, the Mediterranean states did not succumb, and regional colonial wars raged on with neither side able to dominate the other. Factions within the Sons increasingly sought to be able to use crystal energy to quell their adversaries. This was firmly refused to them by the Atla-Ra priesthood and the Law of One populace of Poseida. Several futile attempts to terrorize the Poseidons were attempted by the Sons, and each was quelled. The Poseidons retaliated by shutting down the crystal-fed power systems and thus negating the Sons. The Sons responded by stopping food supply and manufactured goods. A great impasse ensued. The Atlantean Unification Congress. In a great deceptive scheme, disguised as a plan for unification, the Sons approached the Poseidons with the formation of a renewed national congress to work out their growingly tense differences and bring harmony to Atlantis. Representatives from the Law of One were sent along with the representatives from the Sons of Belial. The Congress was formalized with an equal amount of representation from the two parties. Within short order, a federation of sorts was sanctified with the promise of greater harmony. It appeared for several decades that the promise of change and betterment might come about from that National Congress. The Poseidons were encouraged, and many of them let down their guard. The Atla-Ra scientist priesthood, however, remained wary of the motives and sense to deception. Initially, the National Congress did improve relations, and many minor superficial laws that promised unity were set in motion. Yet the primary points of opposition, the genetic slavery and crystal energy management, remained unresolved. However, from within, the Sons of Belial had risen a hypnotic, charismatic leadership who seduced the masses in Atlantis into believing they were the answer to returning Atlantis to its lost golden age of prominence and abundance. Large militaristic legions were formed and gained the edge in covert political persuasion and power. The hybrid mutants were used to terrorize those who opposed them in Eerily and Og, and on one occasion this was even futilely attempted in Poseida. The powerful Sons of Belial contingent were masters of manipulation and media. They presented well-thought-out arguments that masked their true intentions and promised mutual compromise. The propaganda seemed quite feasible on the surface and convinced many, including moderates and some from the Poseidon Law of One race, of its hope for harmony. In what appeared to be a great opportunity for resolution, a law was proposed by the Belial group to bring the genetic engineering, heretofore controlled by the state, under federalized control, and in return, bring the crystal poser power system under the control of a joint governmental agency. A great discussion and debate occurred under great national scrutiny. A vote was set to introduce this, but failed in the congressional vote. Seduction and betrayal. However, a compelling compromise was offered by the cunning leadership of the Belial group, which allowed for the law to be passed on the basis that a council staffed with 5 Poseidons and 4 Sons would head a new government agency for federalized crystalline energy control. The fact that the Law of One group were given apparent majority control of the council made the plan seem very promising to the populace of Poseida. The law allowed that no changes could be made without majority consensus of the council, but included the caveat that while the Atla-Ra priesthood of Poseida would remain in departmental head positions, they would no longer be exempt from governmental controls. A training program was included that would allow engineers from both parties, outside the Atla-Ra, to be trained and taught complex engineering. Initially, despite the wariness of Atla-Ra, the system appeared to be working and bringing a better harmony. However, within 2 years, the wars in the Mediterranean roared back in full escalation, and the rebelling colonies seemed to be gaining the advantage. Pressure mounted to use crystal beams for war purposes under the guise of national security. A discussion, debate, and vote was scheduled for the governing council. National security was touted, and a misaligned sense of manipulated patriotism swept the land. Then the deception rolled into effect. To the great shock and chagrin of the Poseidons, one of the Law of One members of the council switched positions. He was neither of the Atla-Ra nor the Golden Race. He had risen politically as a charismatic leader, a trusted negotiator who had pledged allegiances to the Law of One and gained their full confidence. He had been targeted and seduced by the Sons and fell victim to his ambitions. In the aftermath, this one felt great remorse and spent subsequent lifetimes attempting to make up for the mistake. For truly he did not foresee the catastrophic ending and had allowed himself to be blindly compromised under promises of power and position. Dear ones, such is the illusion of power. You see, when one gains power, that which may seem right can often be an illusion of ego. Each on the road of mastery must eventually decide between power and love. Do you see how ego and power can deceive? Do you? Ego and self-aggrandizement often seduce even highly evolved souls and inevitably leads to their downfall. Thus, through legalized governmental control, the use of the crystal power complex and grids came under governmental control under the Sons of Belial, and sadly could not be reversed. The second moon of Atlantis, that which was known as the second moon of Atlantis, the crystalline poser grids and fire crystals, came under governmental control and their usage became altered as the insider knowledge of the programming grew. The Atla-Ra were able to defer the usage initially for war purposes, but in time were stymied. Now, as we have mentioned earlier, that termed the second moon of Atlantis was in fact a massive crystalline satellite. It was of Arcturian construct and managed by the priest-scientist of the Law of One. The crystalline satellite was an enormous unmanned sphere of brilliant engineering, approximately 5 miles in diameter. It had been in use since the Golden Age of Atlantis and served myriad benevolent purposes. It amplified and controlled the various crystal beams sent from the fire, healing, and energy crystals. It was somewhat of a computerized macro chip that refracted, amplified, and reflected powerfully refined beams of energy for use in agriculture, weather control, tide control, healing temples, regeneration temples, and the enhanced ley energy systems generated by the Crystal Poser system. It loomed in the skies over Atlantis and appeared as a golden harvest moon, and thus was known as the second moon of Atlantis. A rainbow kaleidoscopic energy band of anti-gravity plasma swirled around the sphere and often appeared as what you now term the aurora or northern lights. The satellite crystal moon did not orbit the Earth. It moved as programmed, self-directed, constantly shifting locations in order to perform its myriad tasks over Atlantis, Africa, and the eastern seaboard of Brazil. After the crystalline grid complex legally came under federalized the Sun's control, the Belial Group integrated their own technologists into the engineering group, quickly replacing key department heads with their own. The Atla-Ra attempted to block their attempt to reprogram the satellite for war usage, explaining that overloading the satellite would dissipate the anti-gravity field that maneuvered it, and a catastrophic crash could occur. Their scientists debunked the claim. Some of the Atla-Ra were threatened and were removed. Others began to mysteriously disappear. Many of the Poseidons felt intimidated and powerless as the governing council allowed for the satellite to become a strategic defense weapon, certain it would function as programmed and bring a quick end to the rebellion wars in the colonies. The Belial scientists, with the council approval, reprogrammed a system bypass and began sending destructive thermal light beams used to initiate volcanic eruptions and massive earthquakes against the colonies and nations who refused to give in to their demands. These were aimed in the areas of what is now Greece and Turkey and caused great devastation. Indeed, it gave the zealous Belials the battle advantage they so fervently desired, and they jubilantly increased its usage with support of most of the populace. The beginning of the end. The crystal's second moon satellite began to overload, weakening the anti-gravity field that kept it afloat. The Atla-Ra priesthood understood the implications of what would soon occur when the programming crashed, but their pleas to the council continued to be ignored. After several months of prolonged war use, the satellite began to erratically swerve and shift, and power blackouts began to occur. Tireless attempts to correct it were unsuccessful. The Atla-Ra were asked to lend support in correcting it, but most refused. Some agreed to try and stabilize it to prevent the impending disaster. All attempts failed. The Sun-led National Council refused the suggestion to incinerate the satellite, disbelieving that it would crash, and held to minimizing the effects of an impact even if it did. The arc crystal of anti-gravity. The Atlanteans had the knowledge of hyperdimensional quantum physics and understood that counter-rotating specific magnetic fields around cylindrical crystals creates anti-gravity waves. They had perfected the ability to apply a crystalline shield around crystalline structures, minerals, and gold to create various generating units of hyperdimensional divergent energy fields. The so-called arc or covenant include capacitor devices that can serve as portable generators of various forms of energy. Indeed, there were many memorable units called the Arc of the Covenant. The originals of these capacitors were made with the arc gravity crystal and used for anti-gravity. The arc crystal of gravity was made by modifications of a huge natural crystal in the area below Arkansas, near the Toltec Hills. By channeling and refining the magnetic fields of these naturally occurring magnetic deposits of lead stone, scientists were able to direct the signals of refined magnetization to rotate counterclockwise around specially formed crystals and crystal fields for anti-gravity purposes. These energies were used to charge the crystal satellite or second moon with anti-gravity. A device named Nazi Bell was an unsuccessful attempt to recreate this effect. The German scientists who worked on the Nazi bell were in fact part of the Aryan-Belian technicians allowed to be trained by the Atla during the fall of Atlantis, as part of the Great Atonement discussed in a previous episode. Had the Germans been able to complete this with other technologies, World War II would have had a different outcome, which was not allowed to happen. In fact, the crystalline devices used to combine concentrated brain waves with anti-gravity creation from their capacitors were part of the process used to lift huge stone blocks and build structures such as the pyramids, among others. Stonehenge. It may be interesting to note that the dimensions described in religious textbooks about the Ark of the Promise are the same dimensions as the sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. This will be discussed in more detail in a future installment. For now, be assured that the Ark is still in its place. The Atlantic crystals open the etheric gateway to dimensional portals that will allow humanity with carbon-based life to interface with that of biopragmatic life. More precisely, you exist within both multidimensional parallels of 3 and 5D. You are indeed of Syrian, Arcturian, Pleiadian descent, and many more. All of you are multidimensional sparks of our Master Creator God. It is true. The gateway will open further after activation of the crystalline vortex in Arkansas in 2011. Those of you who connected with the master crystals will be able to experience your own multidimensionality as joyful and over time very easily when you have developed the light quotient and impeccability to do so. Within the dynamism of the Arkansas vortex lies a crystalline energy such as none of you have ever experienced since the golden age of Atlantis over 20,000 years ago. Within the quantum crystalline frequency, you can heal what needs to be repaired, open what needs to be changed, that offers an extraordinary alignment to knowledge of incorruptible bliss. Within this rising energy, you will be able to connect with a living crystalline force that supports Merkana expansion into multidimensional divinity, to your divine self. This is true, and that time is now. It is the return of maternal society, of culture and spiritual energy in sublime balance. That is called the Law of One. It is the long-awaited completion of the transformation of the past. It is the new beginning of spiritual applications of the Law of One. It is the ascension, the crystalline age. But this time, you will get that right. This is the end of the old energy. And it is happening now. In other words, the beginning of the new earth, which begins in the crystal vortex. Why this is called the ascension, it is the crystalline transition. Sleepers wake up.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.